Welcome to this course on avoiding death by PowerPoint. In this course, you will learn tips and tools to revive your presentations. You're going to learn ways to make them more effectively and reflect on your intentions when you're designing future presentations. This course incorporates experience of skilled presenters and educators, as well as research and psychology of how we learn. Let's jump into it. To start us off on this journey, I'm going to show you a couple of slides. These slides are going to have a number of objects. In this case, they're going to be colored dots. What I want you to do is, as soon as you recognize how many objects are on the screen, I want you to either shoot your hand up or call out or go, yep, or something like that. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to go, yep, when I've recognized how many objects there are. And my challenge to you is I want you to try and be faster than I am to recognize the number of objects. Yes, I know I made the slides, but these first couple of slides are actually randomized, so I don't know how many objects are coming. I have to recognize them the manual way, just like you do. So let's begin. Are you ready? Yep. Good. So there are 10 objects. On average, the response time it takes to recognize this screen, these 10 objects, is about 2 seconds. So if you were quicker than me, fantastic. If you're a little bit slower, that's okay. I think I was probably a little bit under 2 seconds, but the average is 2 seconds. Let's try another one. Yep, there are 7 in this page. So you're probably going to be pleased to know that you are average. Just like me, the average time for 7 objects is about 1.2 seconds. So let's try one more. Yep. Damn, that was a lot quicker. So the average time for 5 objects is 0.2 seconds. For those of you like me who are not super mathematically minded, that's actually 6 times faster cognitive recognition with only 2 less objects when we compare the 5 objects to the 7 objects. However, despite the song, the magic number is 6. It's not 3. Yes, 5 has a very low reaction time, but we can actually draw that to 6 and not have significantly detrimental effects. So the research suggests that 6 is your maximum number of objects on the screen. According to Mayer's theory of cognitive load, and this is a topic that I cover in another unit, the human brain has limited capacity for processing information. The presence of too many objects on a screen can actually overwhelm this capacity, and it leads to reduced comprehension, reduced retention, and therefore we're limiting the number of objects to 6 to ease this perceptual limit, so we're not exceeding it. This optimizes the learning. It maintains a balance between engaging content by having stuff on the slides, and we don't want to exceed that cognitive overload. Just like with a computer, we talk about a computer's RAM. If you have lots and lots of programs open at the same time, the computer might slow down, becomes a bit sluggish, it lags. It's the same analogy. The human brain operates in the same way. Having to absorb objects on the screen, as silly as it may seem, actually uses up some of this cognitive load, this RAM, and therefore we have to sacrifice something. And in the human brain, that sacrifice is retention, its absorption of new information, and its memory to actually recall what that thing was, whether that's minutes, hours, days after we've seen the presentation. We don't want our learners reaching a level of cognitive load just absorbing the slides that are presented to them. We don't want them to not retain or not absorb what we are trying to teach them. So how we can quickly focus that is keep the objects to our magic number, 6, and objects include everything on the screen. A picture is an object, a heading is an object, text is an object. So we've got to consider that when we're looking at our slides. How many things have I got on the screen? Am I getting close to that cognitive load capacity? So that's how we can quickly focus and absorb the contents on a slide. Let's now look in the next chapter how you can hold and guide the focus of your audience. Chapter 2, Drawing Attention. In this chapter, we're going to look at how you get the attention of your audience, but more specifically, we're going to talk about where is their attention and where do you want it to be. As part of my army training and the art of camouflage, One must understand how the mind's attention is captured. There are three key things that catch a person's attention. Firstly, we have large objects. Then we have moving objects. And lastly, we have contrasting objects. So contrasting is in something that stands out, a bright color on a dark background, something that looks significantly out of place. So large, moving, and contrast objects are three key ways that our attention is just drawn to something. To take it to the extreme, if I have this on my screen, on my presentation, you are not looking at me. If I'm standing at the front talking, you are not paying attention to me. I could be explaining a key concept of this topic, and you're paying me perhaps 20% of your attention. Good example of this is, right now, I want everyone to put their hand up. If this was in an audience, a bunch of you would be sitting around, and then you catch the movement out the corner of your eye, and you look to the person next to you, and you'd be like, why has everyone got their hands up? Because maybe 20% of my attention, 20% of your audience with a moving object is really listening to what you're saying, and in particular, they're not looking at what you're doing. So you need to be really conscious of where do you want your audience's attention? Do you want them looking at you? Do you want them looking at the screen? And do you want them listening to you, or do you want all of their attention on the screen? In many cases, we want our audience, we want our students to look at the screen and hear us. So that's completely fine. But if you expect the audience to be watching you with something happening on the screen, or listening intently to something that you are saying, you would need to be bigger, more contrasting, or moving more wildly than whatever that thing is on the screen. This also links with that cognitive load theory. We're using all of our cognitive load to see what is on the screen. It's a moving object, so it takes more load to absorb, and our attention is focused on that. So our auditory channel that we're trying to listen is not working as well because most of our attention is focused on the screen. We will link back to this large object aspect and the contrasting object in the next chapters. But for now, the key takeaway is consider where you want your attention. The large object is going to draw attention to a page, a moving object is going to draw attention, and a contrast object is going to draw attention. So let's now look at an example. Consider this slide from a physics lesson. Ignoring the fact that it contains way too much information and way too many objects that we talked about in the previous chapter. If I'm going through this slide, I have no idea where my audience's attention is. Nor would I or you, if you were presenting, would really know where I'm talking about if I refer to a section. If I'm going through this, I'm explaining this concept, and I say, if you look at the equation in the middle, where we have the 7 point, your audience doesn't know where you're trying to talk about. There's a few 7.071s on the screen. There's a couple around the middle. We're using cognitive load. We're consuming time for our audience to figure out where we were. They're not then paying attention to us. They're a little bit behind what you're talking about. It's not a great setup. But if we use a simple PowerPoint feature, so we make each section fade by paragraph, and I'll go through this in step by step at the end of this unit. We then go to the animations toolbar and we go to our effect options. And within effect options, we've got the option to change the color of our text after the animation, which is the fade, has occurred. So using this feature, and I make the after animation slightly darker or slightly lighter than my background screen color, I can turn that previous slide into this. Now in this example, I know exactly where your eyes are looking. You are like moths that I am guiding the flame that is the paragraph illuminated on the screen. The dimmed text is still legible, so if we have a student that's copying, they're a little bit behind, they can still read it. We don't want it too dark that it completely vanishes. But the key attention is the contrast. We've got the bright section that is exactly where they're pointing. Now if I say, if you see on the screen where my total flight time it takes the audience a fraction of a second to go, well, it's clearly talking about the contrast area, and the second line has that. Versus if I had all of this, as we saw before, it's much harder to identify where we want them. So we can draw attention based on this contrasting effect. We can do a similar thing if we've got graphs and data. Consider this example. In this case, I've got a graph of users for different social media platforms in the millions from 2020 to 2024. If I asked you to look at this graph, I have no idea where your eyes are focused. Your cognitive load that we discussed before means it's going to take you a few seconds to absorb all of these things and then identify an aspect that I might refer to. Should I just stand out the front and point at the screen? Should I get a laser pointer? No, I can just draw the attention using shaded boxes like this. This is just a semi-transparent box that I've used an animation to fade over the top. Again, I'll show you how this works at the end of this course. But it's a very simple feature. I know my audience's attention is drawn to the contrast, the Snapchat column. Just as I can go, if you now look at Twitter, much better than this, if you have a look at the LinkedIn, and it takes you a few seconds to figure that out, versus Twitter, Snapchat, back to Twitter, back to Snapchat. I know exactly where my audience is looking with a very simple feature to draw attention. In Chapter 3, we're going to address the cardinal sin of PowerPoint, reading over the top of your slides. Let's jump in. In this example, I can practically see your pupils contracting under the intensity of this screen. The first thought when reading this, particularly on a bright screen, is, damn! We want the reaction to be, damn! Here is something for you to consider. Whilst you are likely straining your eyes to read this on such a dazzling screen, consider this. Not only is dark mode popular for most apps and programs, but it is actually better for your eyes in dim light. A study by Purdue University there is a psychological feature called the redundancy effect. Studies actually showed that students learn better from graphics and narration than graphics, narration, and redundant on-screen text. We cover this in another unit on multimedia learning if you're interested in learning more about this, but the redundancy effect is a classic example of less is more. We do not ever want to read something off a PowerPoint slide. It is better to have an image and narrate it than it is to have that image, all of the text, and then we read at the same time. The brain does not absorb, retain, and remember this information nearly as effectively. So firstly, we've eased the eyes. We've boosted the contrast. Black backgrounds are ideal. We always want black backgrounds where we can. Let's support your cognitive capacity now by contrasting this into a much easier to interpret and follow slide. Here I can read my previous statements, which expands this information and it supports the rapid absorption of the key aspects that are listed here, rather than just reading at the same time you do. The text on your presentations should be cues for you more than they are things for students, for your audience to write down or learn. They could also be the equivalent of the notes someone might take. So dark mode, popular for most apps and programs, could be something that someone would write as notes. You can then elaborate on that and say why, and it jogs your memory. You might have your cue cards, your notes on the PowerPoint that you can go through, but we don't want too much text. Other redundant features include adding images or other documents or low resolution pictures that the viewer must then focus on and try and read. We've all been to that presentation where a low resolution image or a document is shown up on the screen that is either very hard to or near impossible to read. What is the point of that document then? If it cannot easily be visualized and understood, and it doesn't directly relate to something we're talking about specifically in the presentation, it's redundant, so we can take it out. There's obviously a fine line between that. We don't want our PowerPoints to be so boring because we're so focused on the redundancy that we can't have images, we can't have colors and things like that. There is a fine line between it, as long as you're aware of where your attention could be drawn for your audience, and also thinking about, is there a better option for this image, for this text, for this document? So the key point so far is using dark backgrounds for that high contrast and avoiding reading directly off of the slides. Let's look at the next aspect of this, which is focusing the attention of the audience as we do something like this. Here we have the benefits of gamification in learning. You might be like, yes, this is good. We have a dark background. We've condensed the points so that I can expand their meanings as I explain it, and I'm not going to be reading off the text. That's pretty great, right? But where are your eyes continually drawn to? You're instinctively drawn to either the massive high contrast heading at the top or the very bright, large, high contrast image in the middle. Your brain is intuitively drawn to those. You can look back and go, oh yeah, collaborative learning, real world application, but then your eyes are drawn back to the heading or they're drawn back to the picture. So that huge banner or that large high contrast picture is drawing the eyes of our audience. But 9 times out of 10, it's not the important thing in our presentation. The picture of my dice is just to set a theme. It has no relevance to what I want my audience to learn. The heading is just categorizing what I'm talking about, which the audience is already going to know. So why does it need to be the biggest object? Let's try something else. Here the heading grabs your attention. Your eyes gravitate towards it like moths to a flame again. As we said though, it's not the most important thing. How about this? Now the heading is smaller. Your eyes are suddenly drawn down to the text, which is the key things I want you to know. As opposed to this, you're drawn back up to the heading, drawn back down to the text. The heading is not the important thing. The text, the information is. So this should grab the attention. This should be bigger than the heading itself. Let's take it one step further. Much better. Small heading, black background, and there's only 5 objects. But what about all that other information? I know you're probably thinking, yeah, let's just get rid of half the criteria, right? Where am I going to put that? Well, put it on the next slide. More slides is fine. There's this weird perception that having 50 slides in a PowerPoint is really bad. Often your audience, and this is something to be careful of when you're about to present, don't let them see your screen before you've put it in presentation mode. Nothing crushes an audience's soul and will to live like seeing in the bottom corner of your PowerPoint that there are 55 slides and they're like, this is going to be a long presentation. They don't know that each slide has 5 objects and is very condensed and you're going to go through each slide maybe 20 seconds at a time. They just see a large number of slides. And I think that's where the perception comes from, that it's better to just cram everything into less slides. Ultimately, you're going to take the same amount of time. You're going to cover the same amount of content. You're just spreading it out. And this also aligns really well with my other unit on the multimedia learning with this segmentation principle of breaking it into small chunks. Information is like pure alcohol. The body can only take so much in one hit. So instead of forcing our audiences to chug a pint of pure knowledge, let's break it into smaller shots. The shots are our slides. Lots of smaller hits is better than one big pint. In this case, I've put my image back. Yes, the image is still drawing your attention, but it's not as vastly contrasting to the first example we saw. We can still add that immersion, that flair, that personality to our slides. We don't just want it to be a black slide with white text and a small red heading. That then is not particularly engaging. So my next slide would cover the next 4 of these criteria, and I would talk over the top, not reading my slides. Epilogue. The summary. The key takeaways from this course so far are to think about where you want your attention. Remember big objects, contrast objects, moving objects. 6 objects per page is our ideal limit. Using dark backgrounds as much as possible is much better for your eyes, for drawing attention, and for saving battery on laptops. Don't read sentences from slides. Use abbreviated notes, dot points, etc., or no text at all if you're comfortable with that, but do not read sentences straight off a slide. Limit the number of information that you put on a slide. Remember, more slides is better than condensing everything in. We want shots, we don't want pints of information. With these simple 5 adjustments, together, we can make PowerPoints great again. Appendix. Making PowerPoint do your bidding. In this section, I'm going to show you how to do the things that I presented in the course. If you're not super comfortable with PowerPoint or you haven't used those features before, this section is dedicated to showing you step by step live how to do it. If you're comfortable with this, feel free to end the course now and take away this knowledge to your next presentation. Otherwise, stay tuned and we're going to go through how you do this on PowerPoint. Okay, so going back to my original slide, this was my really over-the-top physics presentation. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show you how we did that faded effect to draw our audience's attention. I've already got the animation pane open, but if you're not sure how to do that, we go up here to animations, and then our animation pane is this little box here. So this shows us all of our animations. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select each paragraph and I'm going to fade it. So these are separate text boxes. If you don't have separate text boxes like this, which is pretty common because often we don't go to the effort of putting everything in a completely separate box. If this was all one text, that's completely fine as well. What I can then do is I can fade it, and under Effect Options, I can change that to by paragraph, and you'll see how it goes line by line. You may even want to do that with all of these as well, and make everything go paragraph by paragraph, just to really reinforce that my audience is exactly on the line that I want them to be. Now what we do is over here on our animation pane, if I just click, and I can basically just click, hold shift and click the bottom one to select all of them. Or if you've only got one, that's nice and easy. But then I right click it and there's my effect options that I want. Now we can see the after animation box. As I said, you want a color that is darker than your text color. So in this case, because of my high contrast, I'm using white. I might go for something that's a little bit darker. I might go for something that's quite dark. Sometimes you might want to play around with this, find that balance of what is still visible versus what's too dark, and it's going to show you what that effect looks like. So now, as I go through my slides, as I go through line by line, the previous line fades to this darker grey color. And that's exactly how I draw my audience's attention to a single line. If I then go to a graph, the graph process was a little bit different. For the graph, I actually used a shape. So in this case, if I want my audience's attention to be on Pinterest, I just create a box. I'm going to make it black with no outline. And then what I can do is if I go into gradient and go more gradients, it gives me this option for transparency. So I can just drag this slider a little bit. I've got a little bit more. That seems good. Now that I've done that, I can copy and paste this box and then put another one over Snapchat, for example. All I have to do now is select both of these boxes, go to animation, and I will fade them, or I might just make them appear to be more prompt. Now you can see they will pop up and I can only see my Pinterest. If you want to show multiple, so I want to talk about Pinterest first, then I want to talk about Instagram, what I might do is select them again, go add an animation, and I'll make them disappear. So what this is doing is the first time I click, it's going to make these boxes appear, so my attention is drawn to Pinterest. When I click again, the boxes vanish, so I'm back to the start, and now I might create a new box that I'll put, say we want LinkedIn, I'll put a new box here, and I'll put another box over here. Don't worry about the fact that at the moment it looks like everything is more dark, etc. this process is going to order it based on my PowerPoint. So first click creates, second click makes them vanish. In this case, it's automatically done something a little bit weird where it's tried to just sequence everything together. So I want them to vanish at the same time with previous. I want the two new ones to appear, but these I don't want to disappear until I click. So let's have a look at what that looks like. Present. I click, my highlight is on Pinterest. I click again, my highlight is on LinkedIn. So I can go back and forth using my arrows or my little clicker tool if I've got one to draw the attention of my audience. So that is how you draw the attention line by line and draw the attention of a graph or visual, etc. If I wanted to do something a little bit different and I didn't want to black things out or I had an image, I could do a similar tool, but I could highlight. So I might go for a box, I'll make it transparent, I'll give it a red, nice thick red border, and I'll do the same thing, I'll give it an appear animation. And so now what I'm doing is I'm making my box appear, and I say if you look at Instagram, the contrast is now drawing your attention rather than the lack of any other distraction. Both are effective tools. So that is avoiding death by PowerPoint. I'm Ross Riak. Thank you for watching.